Welcome, I am Rael and your host for Keep Traveling, Your African Vacation, the only podcast which brings you insightful information in the African tourism industry by real tourism professionals. Today is our 13th episode and I have the pleasure of introducing Kevin Higgins, who is co-owner of Changa Safari Camp on Lake Kariba. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Rael. A pleasure to be here.
Whenever I think about Lake Kariba, it just brings me such great memories. That's where I grew up and spent a lot of time on the lake. I envy you for being able to have a place on the shores.
Yeah, it is a very special destination and close to everybody's hearts in Zimbabwe.
Kevin, for international guests that have heard about Changa, what is going to be the best way for them to get to you?
Yeah, Rael, access to Kariba in some respects improving. The local tourist has always relied on the link between Harare and Kariba, the road link. So they would drive into Kariba town, and then to get to Changa, they would take a boat transfer across to Changa. There is access into the Matusadona National Park by road, and that's for the more adventurous type of tourists. The overlanders, typically. Quite a beautiful drive, a fascinating drive, but it is fairly time-consuming, and one needs to plan accordingly. In recent times, there's been a mini boom in the air charter business, so there are a reasonable number of charter businesses offering seat rates into either Kariba Main or to our airstrip in the Matusadona National Park. The airstrip is located about 14 kilometers from camp, so it's very accessible, and the drive in is obviously through the national park itself, so it would take in a lot of scenery and wildlife encounters. The flight in with a charter company into Kariba again necessitates a boat transfer across to Changa Safari Camp. A lot of the charters find their way into us from Victoria Falls and Wankie.
Is it going to be more accessible for people that really don't want to take in Harare? Okay, because let's be honest, main cities are not a highlight of a tourist attraction. So it's going to be more accessible for people to come in via maybe Vic Falls and then get to you?
Yes, most definitely. The bulk of our international guests are coming out of Victoria Falls anyway. There are direct flights from Johannesburg into Victoria Falls now, so it is a hub.
Kevin, I'm not really that familiar with the property and what you're offering, so give us a bit of detail about Changa Safaris.
Yeah, thank you, Rael. Changa's Camp is an exclusive concession area that was put out by national parks, put out to tender, and obviously I tendered successfully for that tender. And it's a camp that we built from grassroots. It's a 20-bed camp. It has 6 luxury tents, twins, and then 2 family units. These are big tents. They're 12 meters by 4.5 meters. Each tent has its own inside shower and toilet and an outside shower and under the stars bath with their own veranda. They are located on the lake shore facing south, which appears a bit odd, but we look directly onto the escarpment, and we have a section of lake between us and the escarpment. So we're on a peninsula, so to speak, hence why we have a section of lake in front of us and then the mountains behind us. We cater to international and local guests, and we offer a number of activities, principally the typical game drive activity, which will take people into the park along the lake shore or inland into parts of the Matusadona National Park. And then these are all accompanied by professional guides, of course. Then walking safaris are very popular as well. In the guides fraternity, Matusadona is actually known as the Park of Tracks.
Please tell me about the diversity of wildlife, flora and fauna at the Matusadona National Park.
Great. So the Matusadona National Park is actually a very diverse park. It's characterized by 3 ecological regions, I would say. You have the shoreline, which is ever-changing with the changing lake levels, and it's an area of grassland, so to speak. Then you have what we call the valley floor, which is inland from that. And it's the area between the shoreline and the escarpment. And it's characterized by Mapani woodland, interspersed by wonderful rivers and streams and springs that find their source at the base of or in the escarpment. Those rivers and springs have their own unique ecosystems with riverine vegetation, and any drive or walk in the park will encounter at least 1 or 2 springs and rivers. And of course they are home to all kinds of species of birds and antelope and leopard and so on. Then we have the escarpment area, which occupies 2/3 of the park. The park is 380,000 acres, so 2/3 of that is up in the mountains. They rise about 700 meters above the valley floor. That's an area of brachystegia woodland, again with the wonderful springs and streams, a very mountainous, very rugged country, largely inaccessible, but with the aid and help of Africa Parks, they will open up those regions initially to overlanders, giving them access to some unspoiled areas. I think the thing that I love the most about the park is that to a degree it's still in its infancy. It died in early 2000. It's being re-established through all sorts of marketing initiatives and Africa Parks intervention. But for the time being, generally a guest in Matusadona can pride himself on being one of very few, possibly even the only guest on a particular day in 380,000 acres. That's a unique experience. That's something that you won't find anywhere else in the world. And even when the camps are busy, it's very unpopulated in terms of camps. So again, you're going to maybe encounter one or two or three at the most other vehicles. And if you're fortunate enough to be on a kill, you could very well be there on your own. The soils afford the opportunity to tourists and guests to see the previous days and night's activities. So walking is a very popular pastime, and again it is in the company of professional trained guides, and we would normally only take 6 people max on a walk like that. Then being on the lakeshore, of course, is a fishing activity. The lake is populated by quite a diversity of species of fish, better known for the tiger fish, the game fish that people all over the world anglers from all over the world come to catch. So we have fishing and obviously something a little different, which is wildlife encounters from a boat. And then, of course, for those that would like to spend the day in camp, then we have a very luxurious swimming pool right on the lakeshore with the same vista where people like to chill out for the day and take in the spa during the course of the day.
Now, as beautiful as Kariba is, once you get up to having spent 3 or 4 days there, it can be a little bit like Groundhog Day, but I know that you have the really nice package which included the Hyde and Wangi National Park, then your camp, and then John's camp at Mana Pools. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that package, or you've updated it or changed it in any way?
No, we haven't really changed in any way, but it's an opportunity to take in 3 of the premier wildlife destinations in Zimbabwe. Wangi is really well known for big populations of antelope and very different terrain to what you would encounter in Matusadona. Matusadona, it's a lake with a national park bordering onto it, and then of course Mana Pools is unique in its own way. It's part of the Zambezi River system, and again, wildlife encounters on the lower Zambezi are quite unique. So we're offering tourists a little bit of everything that there is to encounter in Zimbabwe, and 3 nights at each destination is probably about the right time before, as you say, people get a little bit bored and want to move on and enjoy another different experience.
I have been to all those different places, and yes, I can highly recommend it for anybody that's looking to experience that part of the world. I think you've covered those 3 areas fantastically, so well done to you and the rest of your team on putting that together. Kevin, you spoke about tendering for this property, and I'm assuming that with the tender came some kind of commitment to sustainability, giving back to the local community. Can you fill me in with what you're doing as far as the local community is concerned?
Yeah, Rael, since we won that tender, quite a lot has taken place in Matusadona. Matusadona National Park is a national park. It's owned by the government of Zimbabwe. And in 2019, Africa Parks, which is a non-profit making foundation, partnered with the government of Zimbabwe, as they do, and they took on the management of the national park. Now, they're a very well-equipped foundation. I think they're up to 23 or 24 parks throughout Africa that they are managing, and they're professionals at that. They have all sorts of community outreach programs that they offer. They feed kids in the local community, for example. In fact, this month they peaked by one initiative. They fed 5,611 children, I think, this month, where they all got hot meals and nutritious meals, and it incentivized those children to come to school and get an education. They have a lot of conservation initiatives, educational programs that they run in the communities around us, because of course they appreciate that the buy-in from the communities is crucial to the longevity of the park. They also assist all the communities with human and wildlife encounters, confrontations, and manage them through those. They assist fishing cooperatives and vegetable growing cooperatives, and all of these sort of initiatives in addition to their core functions of running the park. We take pleasure in knowing that a good chunk of the lease fees and the park entry fees and so on that we pay go to supporting those initiatives. Prior to that, I think our greatest initiative was that we partnered with the Department of National Parks in 2013 when we established what was known as MAP, which stood for Matusadona Anti-Poaching Program. At that time, we had a serious infiltration of elephant poachers into the park, and sadly at that time, national parks were not capacitated enough to deal with this threat. So we partnered with one of the other camps in Matusadona known as Spurwing Island, and we helped capacitate national parks through MAP. MAP was basically concentrated on elephant poaching and to a degree on fish poaching in the lake. We ran this initiative at great cost from 2013 through to the arrival of Africa Parks in 2019. But I think MAP, it actually was a very successful initiative, and by year 2019 we were happy to report that we did not lose a single elephant in that year to poaching. So we have been working very hard and close to national parks since the inception of our lease.
Kevin, are we as a whole, and I know you can't speak for everybody, but are we getting on top of the poaching, or the anti-poaching, should I say? Are we winning, do you think?
I would like to think so, Rael. I can only speak for Zimbabwe, and MAP is just one of many initiatives that have been undertaken over the years by private enterprises to support what they sell. And without a doubt, the elephant poaching has declined massively in Zimbabwe. Whereas once upon a time it was subject to conversation on a daily basis, it's not that at the moment. We are seeing managed areas repopulating with animals really well. I think from a Zimbabwean point of view, we're most definitely on top of it. Thanks, of course, to the support of all these local safari camps and safari initiatives, working together with government and the national parks.
It's about educating the younger generation, like you said, those school kids that are going to get a meal. Kids are the ones that need to recognize that, hey, by selling these properties to international guests that bring in money, and they bring in money, why? Because international guests want to have a look at wildlife, etc. It's about doing that, and I hope that there's something going towards educating the younger crowd.
Most definitely. In Africa Parks, like I say, they're very strong in that department, and they have employed a considerable number of new game scouts and staff, all from the local communities. So through the education of those staff and training of those staff, that sort of conservation mindset filters back to the children and the people on the ground.
Just very quickly, how's the level of the lake at the moment? Because I know up until very recently it was going down, as it has in the last 75 years since it's been built. It's either very high or very low. Where are we at right now?
Right now we're at the lowest I think that it's ever been. Zimbabwe's not the catchment for the lake. Botswana and up into northern Zambia is the catchment, and they had a dry season. I think we've got to remember the role of the lake is it's a hydroelectric power station. Zimbabwe will generate power from there because it is cheap, and Zambia the same. These massive fluctuations in the lake, I think, are here to stay. And I certainly don't, from a power point of view, yes, we have to consider that, but a low lake isn't a bad lake. It exposes a massive amount of shoreline, which is grassland, and it's good for the wildlife, and it brings them out onto the shoreline where they're more visible. A tourism perspective, it has some advantages to being low. When the lake is high, then the lake is on the tree line, and basically the animals move inland, and the game viewing and sightings are not as frequent.
I fully get your point. Kevin, I wanted to touch on your thoughts of overseas travelers coming to this part of the world. And in that, I wanted to get your feelings on, do you think the majority of overseas tourists believe that it's safe? Or do we still have to break that boundary down and push the theory that, listen, you're coming to one of the safest places in the world, especially bypassing Harare. Not that Harare is unsafe, but you're coming to one of the safest, most beautiful parts of the world. But I still get that a lot of overseas people think of Zimbabwe, and we're talking about the States, Canada, the UK, Europe, that type of thing. How could you best relay that message to people that are listening into the podcast?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Rael, because it is a stumbling block for us. We have some history, and so there is that fear and conservative nature amongst the tourists there. And we see it in our bookings. We don't get bookings from international tourists online generally. They will go through an agent because they get security through the agent. There's a sense of security, a sense of somebody knowing where you are. And in respect of Zimbabwe, that's quite sad because it is, and I'm not just saying this, I believe it's probably one of the safest destinations in the world to visit. The people are friendlier than you can believe. You talk of Harare as being a place that most people might want to avoid, and I can understand that to a degree, but I will happily walk downtown Harare or in the most populated parts of Harare on my own and enjoy it. It's just what it is. I think the only way that we're ever going to get that message through is through people themselves who have visited the country and take the message back. So our international tourism is growing. Victoria Falls has equipped itself to receive more tourists, more facilities that are going in there, and of course that's what everybody associates Zimbabwe with, is Victoria Falls. But we're slowly getting people moving out of the hub, so to speak, and moving into Wankie and Matusadona and Gonarajo and Monopools and so on. And so the tourism is growing, and hopefully the good news about a safe destination will get back to grassroots.
It is quite frightening, and with respect to the listeners out there, people from overseas, they just get this impression that people look at Zimbabwe, Zambia, South Africa, Mozambique, and they look at that and there's pictures of what's happening in the Congo and they relate the one to the other. Complete nonsense. So I'm always trying to break down that boundary and try and do whatever I can to get people to come and visit our beautiful part of the world. Kevin, you've been in the game, I think, quite a while now, if I'm not mistaken. Have you been in the tourism game prior to obtaining the licenses in Changa, or was this your first entry into the hospitality sector?
I'm actually a cattle auctioneer by trade and have been a cattle auctioneer for the past 20 years. My background is I was schooled and reared in very rural areas, so I've always had a love and a passion for the outdoors. And I've been fortunate in my auctioneering years to be able to train as a professional guide, and I qualified as a professional guide in 1998. Since then I have been doing a bit of freelancing, but I guess that was the catalyst for my investment into the tourism industry as a stakeholder.
You've been a guide since 1998. I want to know a particular fun fact or funny experience that you incurred that you can look at yourself in the mirror and, something that the listeners are going to think humorous and humanize you because of the story you're going to tell us now.
One comes to mind, and I'm glad to say it actually took place at Changa. In my early days there as a guide at Changa, I had guests that were from the diplomatic corps in Harare. We drove out of camp. We hadn't been out of camp very long before we encountered a small herd of elephant crossing the road, and so we stopped to let them cross the road, and they're generally of a very good nature in Matusadona, so your encounters can be quite up close and personal. Anyway, we watched them cross the road, and eventually they all crossed the road bar one, and I could see that this young bull he was actually sleeping on the road. I didn't want to scare him, so we sat quietly and just waited for him. And when he woke up, he didn't know that we were there. So he woke up and walked straight up to the vehicle, which got everybody a little bit excited, and only really realized that the vehicle was there when he was upon it. Then he started to check us out and smell us out, and he literally walked around to the driver's door and he put his trunk on my ear, and then he sniffed over my head and all around my face, leaning a little bit away from him, but doing my very best to remain calm and hoping that the guests in the back were of the same frame of mind. And eventually, when he had sussed me out, he quietly moved off, and I recall looking behind me at my guests, and most of them were under their seats. But it was quite an encounter for them, and those of them that sat through it got it on video, and it was quite spectacular.
I'd love to see the video. It's been my absolute pleasure to have you. I've really enjoyed chatting. I hope the listeners will enjoy listening to you being part of a beautiful part of the world. I appreciate your time again, and thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Rael. Appreciate your time too. All the very best.
Today I was chatting with Kevin Higgins, co-owner Changa Safaris on Lake Kariba, Zimbabwe. Tune in again next week when we will be chatting to Scott Brown, operations manager of Baines River Camp on the Zambezi River. My name is Rael, and consider this. A few years from now, you will not remember how much it cost you, but you will still remember the memories you made. Keep traveling.